Hi, this is Ms. D, and this is your video review on imperialism. First things first, bear in mind that our unit on imperialism follows the Industrial Revolution, and there's a reason for this. After the Industrial Revolution, there was a huge demand for colonies. And that's because as more of these countries across Europe and eventually into the United States, as they build more factories, these factories need raw materials to produce goods. In addition, all of these goods that these industrialized economies produce, they need to be sold. You need markets for these goods. And so having lots of colonies, having a large colonial empire will give you both raw materials and a market for your goods. Now, when they went to take over these other countries, this isn't what they told them. Hi, I'm here to take your stuff and force you to buy mine. No, instead, they came up with different justifications. Justifications like social Darwinism and white man's burden. And these are very racist beliefs. This idea that these colonized people actually benefit from having these foreign powers in control, that these stronger groups have the right and have the responsibility to conquer weaker nations so that they can civilize them, so they can spread their culture, and so on and so forth. All right, and the largest empire in the world was actually Britain's. You remember we mentioned the fact that the sun never set on the British Empire. And one of the reasons why Britain was able to maintain control of its empire and really maintain it is because it will eventually gain control of the Suez Canal, as you can see in the picture on the left. The Suez Canal is located in Egypt, and that is a really important, strategically critical location, strategically important location. So Britain and France are going to want to gain control over Egypt so they can control that canal. Now, if you remember, the jewel of the British Empire, the jewel in the crown was, of course, India. And we talked a lot about how that relationship between India and the British Empire evolved over time, right? They'd been involved with, the British East India Company. Britain had been involved in India for a very long time. But what really changed the relationship between India and Britain was the Sepoy Rebellion. You may remember the Sepoy were the Indian soldiers who were part of the British Army, right? And the Sepoy Rebellion came, remember that was that whole thing about the Sepoy heard that there was pork and there was cow and pig fat being used on the bullet casings. Um, there's some people say that's true, some people say it's rumor. Regardless, it was believed. It launched a huge rebellion in India, and the people who were rebelling wanted to end foreign control. They wanted to end British control of India. And so for the Indian people, they really see the Sepoy Rebellion as the first battle for Indian independence, because of course it's after the Sepoy Rebellion that we see an increase in Indian nationalism. All right, the next place we looked at was Africa. And you may remember Africa is Africa gets divided at the Berlin Conference. It's this period of very, very rapid colonization. You may remember there has been a lot of European contact with Africa for a long, long time, right? There had been the slave trade, there had been, the colonies in South Africa, what have you. But generally speaking, Europeans stayed on the coast. But now, due to technology, suddenly the Europeans have a way to deal with the African, because Africa had very, very challenging topography, or geography, however you want to phrase it. The fact that it didn't have many navigable rivers, that it had, areas that were very hard to cross, that it had a climate where you have lots of mosquitoes that spread disease. All of these things made European colonization of Africa impossible. for earlier, but now that they have technologies like medicine, like more modern weapons, like modern transportation technology, and so on, suddenly the interior of Africa is now accessible to Europeans, and can be colonized. So that's how you have this meeting at the Berlin Conference, right? So all the European powers meet in Berlin, Germany, and talk about how they're going to divide up Africa. And so as a result, after this conference, after the Berlin Conference, Africa goes from vast majority being independent to the vast majority of the continent being colonized. And you may remember one of the long term impacts of this colonization is the creation of artificial borders. Because at the Berlin Conference, this division of Africa was done without regard to the people who live there. So you today have countries in Africa that are made up of tribal groups and ethnic groups that hate each other, that do not get along. This is very different than the ways that countries like, that Italy and Germany got together because, nationalism tied them together. Very different process in Africa. And so, like I said, it has a lot of long-term impacts, making these countries, creating a situation where it's not uncommon for a lot of these countries to have gone through periods of civil war and a lot of unrest. All right, the next country we looked at was China. And of course, you may remember China was a very valuable trading partner. I mean, we studied this at the very beginning of the year with the whole Silk Road. And, even Christopher Columbus made his journey looking for, a fast and easy path to the east. Everybody wanted to trade with China. Very, very valuable items that China made. And so the British wanted to expand its trading relationship with China. China didn't want it. And so Britain started importing opium, right, into China, opium being this very powerful drug. And what ends up happening in China is most of the people in China end up becoming addicted. And as a result, the Chinese government, they do everything they can to kind of limit the drug trade, doesn't work. So China goes to war with Britain and they lose like nobody's business. They didn't have they didn't have a chance because of course the Chinese level of technology, their military technology was far behind the Europeans. So there was no way. China loses the Opium Wars. That's how you get the Treaty of Nanjing. And so basically this is the start of China losing control of its own country. It is divided into spheres of influence, right? It's cut up among all these different European powers. They can't stop it. The Chinese government does stay, nominally in control, but as you can see from the map, different European countries gain gain control over, kind of have special trading relationships within their area of China. And we mentioned, so of course, it's dominated by European powers. It no longer can keep Europeans out. And one of the other things we talked about briefly was the open door policy. The United States, as you can see from the map, the United States does not have a sphere of influence in China. But China was such a valuable trading partner and had such valuable goods that America did not want to be shut out of the Chinese market. So it said that there should be an open door policy, that all countries should have the right to trade with China. Of course, this had nothing to do with China. China wanted to keep everybody out. They no longer had that choice, though, because once they were dominated by European powers, now they're open to trade whether they like it or not. And this ends up leading to a few rebellions. We talked about the Taiping Rebellion, but the big one, the one that was the Boxer Rebellion. You should know the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion, this is the one where the people were screaming, death to the foreign devils. And um, this rebellion had to be put down by the European powers working with China. And again, very similar to the Sepoy Rebellion. Very often, the Sepoy Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion, what they have in common is they both are movements, popular movements, movements by the people to try to eliminate foreign influence in their country and try to get the foreigners out. And both, by the way, are unsuccessful. They're both unsuccessful. Now, we can also compare and contrast the Chinese experience. It's kind of interesting to compare that experience with what went on in Japan. Both China and Japan are similar in that they were very, very isolated. They did not want any foreign influence in their country, and they cut themselves off from outside influences. And they both had very ethnocentric cultures. But what happens is similar to the British kind of forcing their way into China. Similarly, Matthew Perry, a United States military officer, shows up in Japan and kind of forces his way in. And he demands that Japan open itself up to trade the same way the British had demanded it of China. And Japan potentially could have gone to war with the United States. They could have tried to defend themselves. But again, very similar to China, their technology, their military technology was very, very far behind the rest of the world. When Matthew Perry's steamship pulled in, they saw all this smoke. They thought something was on fire. They were still fighting with samurai and samurai swords. So the Tokugawa shogunate, which was the government at the time, knew they couldn't win. So when Matthew Perry arrives back in Japan, they accept it and they open themselves up to trade. Unlike China, they don't have to be forced, they accept it. And as a result, what happens is Japan recognizes that it cannot compete with the rest of the world unless it industrializes. It must modernize its country very, very rapidly, or it will lose control. It will be taken over by foreign powers. So this leads to a period known as the Meiji Restoration. And this is a government kind of government movement that the government forces the people to modernize, and it happens very, very quickly. So you go from women wearing very traditional clothing and having samurai warriors fighting with swords and fighting with bows and arrows, and in a very short amount of time you start seeing the rise of people dressing in Western clothes, using much more advanced military equipment, having getting rid of feudal, having more land reform, opening up factories, building, railroads. It is just this period. The Meiji Restoration is just a very rapid modernization of the economy, of the government, of society in Japan. And one of the side effects of this move to industrialize is that Japan does not have a sufficient amount of natural resources. It's a small volcanic island. It did not have a lot of natural resources, and therefore Japan changes its foreign policy, becomes one of imperialism. That Japan goes from being a target of imperialists to becoming an imperialist itself. And it becomes an imperial power. It's able to annex Korea. It takes over parts of China. It has a very aggressive foreign policy where it starts to, use this technology, use this military technology that it built up very quickly, and goes to war and is successful. It actually goes to war with Russia and wins. So as you can see, it occupies Korea. It seizes Manchuria. That's a part of China, and the rape of Nanjing, which was part of the Sino-Japanese War, and we're going to talk about that more when we get into World War II. But again, Japan, because of the Meiji Restoration, pursues a policy of imperialism. All right, and with that, you are done with your review. Good luck, and I will see you on Thursday.